Chevrolet secretly built a mid-engine monster in 1963 that was faster than the Shelby Cobra, but after just 23 cars, they abandoned it completely. And the reason why will blow your mind. You're looking at the Chevrolet Cheetah, the most radical American race car you've never heard of. While Carroll Shelby was getting all the glory with his Cobras, a California hot rodder named Bill Thomas was building something that made the Cobra look like yesterday's news. This wasn't just another Corvette with a fancy body kit. This was a purpose-built race weapon with the engine behind the driver, something nobody in America was doing in 1963. The Cheetah story starts with one man's obsession and General Motors' dirty little secret. See, GM had officially pulled out of racing in 1963. The Automobile Manufacturers Association had this gentleman's agreement: no factory racing programs. Ford said to hell with that and backed Shelby's Cobras with everything they had. Meanwhile, Chevrolet was stuck watching their rival dominate every track in America. But behind closed doors, Chevy executives were furious. They needed something, anything, that could shut down the Cobra threat. Enter Bill Thomas. This wasn't some corporate suit with a racing dream. Thomas was already a legend in California drag racing circles, building some of the nastiest Corvettes on the planet. When Chevy came knocking with their under-the-table proposal, Thomas didn't just promise to beat the Cobra, he promised to humiliate it. The car Thomas designed broke every rule in the American racing playbook. While everyone else was stretching front engines further back for better weight distribution, Thomas went completely radical. He took a Corvette 327 and stuck it right behind the driver's seat. Nobody, and I mean nobody, was doing mid-engine layouts in American racing. The Europeans had been playing with the concept, but in America, you might as well have shown up with a rocket ship. The body was pure function over form. Thomas didn't care about pretty curves or elegant lines. Every single surface was designed to either cut through air or create downforce. The nose dropped so low it practically scraped the ground. The roofline barely cleared the driver's helmet. And that tail, it kicked up into this aggressive ducktail that looked like it came from another planet. This thing was 90 inches wide, but only 42 inches tall. Dimensions that made even the low-slung Cobra look like an SUV. But here's where Thomas got really clever. The entire body was hand-laid fiberglass and he made it paper thin. We're talking about panels so light you could literally see sunlight through them. The whole car, engine, transmission, everything weighed just 1,510 pounds. For comparison, a Shelby Cobra weighed about 2,300 pounds. The Cheetah had the same horsepower, but 800 pounds less mass to move around. The chassis was a work of art. Thomas built this incredibly rigid space frame from chrome-moly steel tubing. Every tube was precisely placed to handle the massive forces this car would generate. The suspension used Corvette components, but Thomas completely re-engineered the geometry for the mid-engine layout. He even designed his own aluminum wheels, because nothing on the market was light enough for his vision. When the first Cheetah hit the track in late 1963, it was like watching a cheat code in real life. At Riverside Raceway, the Cheetah prototype ran lap times that were 3 seconds faster than the best Cobras. 3 seconds might not sound like much, but in racing, that's the difference between first place and not even making the podium. The acceleration was absolutely violent, with that Chevy 327 pumping out 375 horsepower in a car that weighed less than most motorcycles today. The Cheetah could hit 60 miles per hour in under 3 seconds. This was 1963, remember? Most muscle cars took 6 or 7 seconds to reach 60. The quarter mile? 11.2 seconds at 128 miles per hour. Those are supercar numbers, even by today's standards. But the Cheetah's greatest strength was also its fatal flaw. That incredibly short 90-inch wheelbase that made it so quick also made it absolutely terrifying at high speed. Drivers reported that above 140 miles per hour, the front end would start getting light. Push it past 150, and the nose would literally start lifting off the ground. One test driver described it as driving a bar of soap on a wet counter. The handling at the limit was equally sketchy. The mid-engine layout gave incredible turn-in response, but when the rear end let go, it let go instantly. No warning, no gradual slide, just immediate, violent oversteer that even professional drivers struggled to catch. Remember, this was before any kind of aerodynamic aids like wings or spoilers. The only thing keeping that rear end planted was the driver's skill and a whole lot of prayer. GM executives watched the early tests with mixed emotions. On one hand, they had their Cobra killer. The Cheetah was faster in every measurable way, but they also had a car that was basically undrivable for anyone except the most skilled professionals. And then there was the bigger problem. The FIA, International Racing's governing body, had just announced new homologation rules. To race in the GT class, manufacturers had to build at least 100 street-legal versions of their race cars. This put Chevrolet in an impossible position. The Cheetah was never designed for the street. It had no windows, no weather protection, no real interior to speak of. The ground clearance was so low, you couldn't drive it over a matchbook. Converting it to street use would require a complete redesign, and even then, the idea of selling 100 mid-engine death traps to the public terrified GM's lawyers. Bill Thomas tried desperately to save the project. He actually built a handful of street versions with basic amenities like a windshield and doors that sort of opened and closed. He lowered the engine output to a mere 350 horsepower and added a taller final drive ratio for street cruising. But it was like putting a saddle on a shark. These street Cheetahs were absolutely miserable to drive anywhere except a racetrack. The final nail in the coffin came from an unexpected source, Ralph Nader. His book, Unsafe at Any Speed, had just savaged the Corvair for being dangerous, and GM was in full damage control mode. The last thing they needed was to officially endorse a car that made the Corvair look like a Volvo. In early 1964, Chevrolet quietly pulled all support from the Cheetah program. Without GM's backing, Thomas tried to keep the dream alive on his own. He managed to build somewhere between 16 and 23 Cheetahs total. Nobody knows the exact number because records were destroyed in a fire at his shop. A few privateer racers campaigned them with mixed results. When they finished, they usually won. But more often than not, they didn't finish. Mechanical failures, crashes, and driver errors plagued every Cheetah team. The most successful was probably Alan Green, who actually managed to win several SCCA races in 1964 and 1965. But even he admitted the car was a handful. In an interview years later, he said driving the Cheetah was like trying to control a controlled explosion. He loved it and hated it in equal measure. By 1966, the Cheetah was effectively extinct from professional racing. The few remaining cars ended up in private collections or were converted to drag racing, where their straight-line speed could be exploited without worrying about corners. Bill Thomas moved on to other projects, though he never created anything as radical as the Cheetah again. Today, finding an original Cheetah is like finding a unicorn. Of the 23 or so built, maybe half still exist, and even fewer are in running condition. When one does come up for sale, prices start at $500,000 and go up from there. There's a cottage industry of replica builders trying to recreate Thomas's vision, but without his obsessive attention to weight saving, they're just shadows of the original. The Cheetah remains one of the greatest what-ifs in American racing history. What if GM had given it proper development time? What if aerodynamics had been better understood in 1963? What if the homologation rules hadn't changed? We'll never know. But for one brief moment, a California hot rodder with a wild idea built something that made Carroll Shelby sweat, forced Chevrolet to break their own rules, and proved that American engineers could out-radical anyone when they really wanted to. The Cheetah never got its chance to become a legend. Instead, it became something even more special, a reminder that sometimes the craziest ideas are the ones worth pursuing, even if they're too dangerous to succeed. In a world of Cobras and Corvettes playing it safe, the Cheetah dared to be different, and for those lucky enough to see one run-in period, they witnessed something that was less car and more controlled explosion on wheels. Some say Bill Thomas was ahead of his time, others say he was completely insane. The truth is, he was probably both, and that's exactly what made the Cheetah so unforgettable.